If you and your partner are both heading toward retirement, there is one number almost nobody sits down to work out: £25,095. That is what 2 full state pensions add up to in the current tax year, and it changes almost everything you have been told about how much you need saved. Most couples in their late 50s or early 60s are staring at headlines demanding £600,000, sometimes £1 million, before they can call retirement comfortable. Here is what most of those headlines leave out. 2 state pensions, added together as a household, can cut the private savings a couple actually needs by close to 60%. Not through some clever trick. Through a rule almost nobody walks you through. That rule is the personal allowance, the amount HMRC lets you earn before any tax is due. It belongs to each person separately, which means a couple gets 2 of them, not 1. Line 2 state pensions up against 2 personal allowances, and something unusual happens. Nearly all of that £25,095 lands in your account completely free of tax. This is not about being wealthy. It is about frozen tax thresholds finally meeting a state pension that keeps rising under the triple lock, and for a couple, that collision works in your favor. Most retirement calculators are not built for that. They treat a household like one person with double the bills, then hand you a savings target that has almost nothing to do with your real position. In the next section, I will show you the £45 headroom, the exact reason most couples will not pay a penny of tax on their state pensions, and why that one detail should be steering your entire withdrawal strategy. In the current tax year, 2 full new state pensions in a couple's household add up to £25,095. That figure comes straight from the weekly rate of £241.30 paid to each of you then combined. Compare that to your combined personal allowance. Each of you can earn £12,570 before HMRC takes a penny. Add both allowances together and you get £25,140. Your combined state pension sits at £25,095, which leaves a gap of just £44.80, the entire tax-free headroom a couple has left once both pensions are counted. This is not about being rich. It is the government's frozen thresholds finally catching up with a rising state pension, and for couples, that timing creates a safety zone that single retirees do not get. A single person on the full new state pension is sitting on £12,547.60, only £22.40 under their own personal allowance. For that single person, staying under the line takes constant vigilance. For a couple, the same rules leave far more breathing room, simply because there are 2 allowances working for one household instead of one. That is not hypothetical. A small part-time wage, a modest annuity from an old job, even the interest sitting quietly in an everyday savings account, can be enough to tip a single retiree over that line and into a tax return they were not expecting. The trade-off sits underneath all of this good news. Personal allowances have been frozen for years, while state pensions keep climbing under the triple lock, so that £44.80 headroom is not fixed. It has been shrinking every year the freeze continues, and on current trends, the full state pension may eventually edge above the personal allowance entirely. I have sat with couples who were genuinely surprised when they laid both pension letters side by side and realized the totals landed almost exactly on their combined allowance. It looks planned. It is really just where 2 long-running sets of rules happen to cross right now. But what if the basics are not enough for you? If you are aiming for something closer to £35,000 a year as a household, the maths for a couple works completely differently than what most guides will tell you. Once you know the floor, the next question is simple. How much private pot do you actually need on top of it? Most guides answer that by picking one big number and telling you to save toward it, regardless of your circumstances. There is a better way, worth understanding properly, and it is called the gap fill method. Instead of building a pot large enough to generate your entire £35,000 lifestyle, you only need one large enough to fill the gap between your guaranteed floor and your goal. Your floor sits at £25,095. Your goal is £35,000. The actual gap between them is £9,905 a year, not £35,000. To produce roughly £9,905 a year from your own savings, using a commonly used 4% withdrawal rate, you need a combined private pot of around £247,625. That is the number that actually matters for a couple aiming for a £35,000 lifestyle, not the £500,000 to £600,000 figure that most standard advice keeps repeating. That is a meaningfully smaller mountain to climb. That 4% figure is not arbitrary. It is a withdrawal rate commonly used in retirement planning because it is built to make a pot last through a full retirement while still adjusting for inflation each year. It is a planning guide, not a guarantee, but it turns a vague target into a realistic one. It also assumes your money stays invested through retirement rather than sitting entirely in cash, since a pot earning nothing before inflation will not stretch anywhere near as far. That gap between £247,625 and £600,000 is not just a figure on a spreadsheet. For someone on an average UK income, a difference that size can represent 7 to 10 years of extra work you may not actually need to put in, chasing a target that was never built around your household in the first place. I used to tell people to leave the state pension out of their early planning altogether because it felt too far off to matter. I was wrong about that. At 55 or 60, it is one of the most powerful assets on your list, because the triple lock keeps moving it with inflation while most of the rest of your plan does not. However, there is a dual tax trap hiding in exactly how you draw that £9,905 gap between the two of you, and getting it wrong can quietly hand a chunk of it straight to HMRC. That £9,905 gap does not have to come from one person. How you split it between the two of you can be worth real money because it decides how much of it stays inside each of your own tax-free personal allowances. Say partner A draws the full £9,905 gap alone from their own SIP, on top of their own state pension. Almost the entire amount lands on top of income that is already close to their personal allowance, so a meaningful slice of it gets taxed. Split that same £9,905 evenly, roughly £4,950 each, and both of you draw comfortably inside your own allowance, with far less handed over in tax. This is worth checking properly, not assuming. Look at your pension pots by name, not as one shared total. If one of you is holding a large SIP and the other has little beyond the state pension, you are set up to be tax inefficient the moment drawdown starts, even though the household total looks perfectly healthy on paper. It is a 5-minute check, but it is the kind of 5 minutes that quietly saves you hundreds of pounds a year once drawdown actually begins. There is a second window worth knowing about while you plan this. The current tax year is the last one where anyone under 65 can put the full £20,000 ISA allowance into a cash ISA. From the 6th of April 2027, that cash ISA limit drops to £12,000 for under 65s, while the overall £20,000 ISA allowance itself stays the same. If you are still building a cash buffer, this year and next carry more weight than they used to. If you are realizing your numbers as a couple look better than the headlines suggested, that is worth sitting with for a moment. It is also worth subscribing for, because the rules that actually move your numbers rarely make it into the generic advice everyone else keeps repeating. But everything we have covered so far assumes both of you are still here to use it. We need to talk about what happens to this maths the moment one partner is gone, because that is where it turns brutal. One day, one of you will not be there anymore. It is not a comfortable sentence to write into a financial plan, but avoiding it is exactly how households end up unprepared for the moment it happens. The moment one partner passes away, the household loses one full state pension immediately, roughly £12,547.60 a year, gone from the income side of the ledger overnight. That is not a gradual adjustment. It lands the same month. The bills do not fall by the same amount. Council tax drops by 25% under the single-person discount, which helps, but it is the only major bill that moves. Standing charges on gas and electricity stay exactly where they were. Home insurance, broadband, the building's costs on a house built for two, all of it carries on at 100% of what it cost before. Age UK's research puts the everyday cost of living for a single person at somewhere between 70 and 80% of what a couple spends, not half. Put those two facts side by side, and the mismatch is stark. Your income can fall by 50%, while your costs barely move below 70%, and that gap is exactly where a surviving partner gets squeezed hardest. There are two ways to soften that gap before it ever needs to be lived through. The first is a dedicated survivor's buffer sitting inside an ISA, money that is never touched for everyday spending and exists purely to smooth the year or two after a loss, while pensions and paperwork get sorted out. The second is checking whether the smaller pension in your household actually pays out to a survivor at all. A defined benefit pension usually carries some form of spouse's pension built in, but it is worth confirming rather than assuming. A SIP works differently. It can normally be passed on tax-free if the pension holder dies before 75, but only if it has been nominated to go to the right person on the right form. I remember a couple, David and Susan, who had split everything 50-50 on paper for years and felt genuinely organized about it. When David passed, Susan discovered his private pension had never been set up with a joint life provision. She did not just lose her husband. Within a few months she had lost close to 40% of what used to be their monthly grocery and heating budget, on top of everything else she was carrying. To make sure that gap never catches you the way it caught Susan, we need to look at why your own national insurance record might already be lying to you about the income you are counting on. Everything so far assumes both of you actually qualify for the full new state pension. That is not automatic. Qualifying years are tracked individually, and plenty of people reach their 60s with real gaps in that record without ever realizing it. The most common cause among couples in their 50s and 60s right now is time spent caring, whether that was raising children through the 1990s and 2000s, or stepping back from work later to look after an elderly parent. Those years can carry national insurance credits, if they were claimed at the time, but plenty of people never claimed them, simply because nobody told them the credit existed. It is worth checking rather than assuming, since the credit itself is often free to claim once you know it is there. It is an easy gap to miss. A few years at home with a young child in the 1990s, before child benefit paperwork automatically protected your record the way it does now, is sometimes all it takes to leave someone 2 or 3 years short of the 35 years needed for the full rate. DWP figures show that gap has been narrowing over time, but thousands of women are still reaching state pension age without the full 35 qualifying years needed for the complete £12,547 and 60 pence a year rate. Some men carry the same gap for the same reason, just in smaller numbers. There is a second layer worth knowing about. If you were born on or after the 6th of March, 1961, your state pension age is now 67, not 66. That means a couple where one partner is 64 and the other is 62 can face a staggered gap of a year or more between one state pension starting and the other joining it, on top of any shortfall in qualifying years. The only way to know where you actually stand is to check, not estimate. Both of you should look up your own state pension forecast on gov.uk individually, because one partner's record tells you nothing reliable about the others. If that forecast shows you are short on qualifying years, there is a specific, time-limited way to buy back some of those years before that window narrows further. After decades of managing money as a couple, most people naturally think in terms of one shared total. Whatever is in the accounts, however it got there, feels like our money, and honestly, that is a completely reasonable way to run a marriage. HMRC does not see it that way. It sees two individuals, each with their own personal allowance, each taxed on their own income, regardless of whose name built the pot in the first place. It feels natural to just glance at the total on the spreadsheet and call it done. That is how you have run your finances for 40 years, and there is nothing wrong with that instinct. In retirement specifically, though, shared can quietly become a tax trap, simply because the two systems, yours and HMRC's, are not counting the same way. I have seen couples do this without ever realizing it, simply because nobody sat them down and pointed out the mismatch. A small language shift helps more than people expect. Start thinking in terms of my allowance and your allowance instead of just our money, and it becomes much easier to notice when one of you is about to waste part of a £12,570 allowance that the other could have used instead. Set aside 10 minutes this weekend and look at whose name each account and pension actually sits in. If 90% of your household savings are sitting in the higher earner's name, you may be volunteering to pay more tax than you need to without ever meaning to. 3 things are worth doing with everything we have covered here. Check both of your state pension forecasts and confirm you are genuinely on track for that combined £25,095 floor. Work out your real gap, your goal minus that floor, rather than the full headline number the generic guides keep quoting. Then balance how you draw from your private pensions, so both of you stay inside your own £12,570 allowance, instead of stacking all of it onto one person. None of these 3 steps need a spreadsheet built by anyone else. They just need you to run your own household's numbers instead of borrowing someone else's. Retirement, planned as a couple, is a team sport. Once you actually use both sets of rules instead of just one, the mountain in front of you is usually smaller than it looked from a distance and a lot more achievable than the £600,000 or £1 million headlines ever made it feel. If this kind of detail is useful to you, subscribing helps because there is more coming on exactly these kinds of UK-specific rules for the years ahead. I will see you in the next one.